Hello. Everyone knows I'm here. Hi, Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome for being here. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Cassidy, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the library. I'd also like to welcome our viewers live over live stream. Hello. Before we get started, please note the feedback forms on the table. Take some time to tell us about our programming, give us any ideas you can think of programs that you would like to see. And today, we are delighted to introduce Jim Mitchell. Jim is a Fayetteville-based nonprofit management consultant with 4 decades of experience managing and advising nonprofits with budgets from $25,000 to $5 million. Jim specializes in nonprofit organizational assessments, strategic and long-term planning, budget creation and management, development/marketing plans and implementation, that was a big word, database implementation, and creating and managing major fundraising and special events. Please help me welcome Jim Mitchell.
Well,
You said you were going to be a YouTube star. Remember?
oh, okay.
You remember?
Oh, how's
now?
that sound?
You're going to be a star.
The sound of my voice weirds me out.
Yeah, I wasn't having fun with the microphone either.
Yeah, so, okay, well, we'll give it a shot. Yeah, I always tell people I've been in nonprofit all my life. I started in grade school when I'd do theater productions in the backyard, and it was a dime entry fee. But if you brought somebody with you, you got a 50% discount if they paid full price. And then all the proceeds were donated to my church's library. So I think that was my influence on when I got older and I realized I didn't want a real job. My dad I'd come home and he'd ask me, and he'd say, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm working with the symphony." He'd be like, "When are you in a real job? You need to get a job in one of those companies that has good benefits." And I was always like, "I don't think that's going to work for me necessarily." So we'll see how that goes. So real quickly, on the back table, there's a list that Cassidy very graciously put together for you. That's a list of all the books in the library you can check out on fundraising and capital campaigns and nonprofit things. And I've got 3 that I checked out just to remind myself if there's something I hadn't done in a long time or forgotten about. So if you want to look at these or pass them around while we're talking or whatever and just glance through them, don't walk off with them because I've checked them back in and you'll be stealing them from the library and they won't have well, they will come after me, so don't take them. Go check one of them out if you want it. So, and one of them's kind of old. I got tickled because it's got a CD in the back. I was like,
I bought new ones, Jim. They're not in yet.
Okay. I was like, that's my era, and I'm going to take this off because I'm getting warm already. Yeah, I'm kind of from the school of hard knocks to a certain degree, because I did start out after college. I did. If y'all have ever heard of that book, What Color's My Parachute? Yes. You know that book? That came out like the year I graduated from college, so you can do the math. Because I was kind of lost when I got, I was going to get a degree in psychology and go to law school. I got a degree in business, and then I took the LSAT and went, I don't think I'm going to get in law school based on these scores. So that went out the window. But anyway, I used that book, and everything kept centering back around nonprofit and arts, and that's my background's in arts management primarily. And I ventured out into education and social services and some other, when times got lean in the arts, I had to start scurrying around in other service industries to make a living. So I've worked 40 years in nonprofit, did a little stint in mortgage banking, and 20 of it was directly working with organizations, either being a ED or I've been the first development marketing person for a lot of organizations, helped them create fundraising programs. The last 20, I've worked for myself as a consultant. And I was recruited to kind of work for the university, and that didn't work for me. So I finished my contract with the university, and I was still young enough. I was like, well, I'd always wanted to work for myself, and I don't want to be 80 and go, gosh, I was too chicken to try that. So I thought, I'm young enough that I'll try it, and if I fall on my face, well, you know, I'll go to work for Walmart or something. I'll figure it out. So the last 20 years I've been here, stint in Florida for a year. That was a mistake, but have been pretty much based here. So yeah, I've done everything y'all have done. I've done marketing, I've done development. I've worked in every area of contributed and earned income. I've done a lot of programmatic design and implementation and stuff. So I feel like I've got a pretty broad, I'm sort of like, what, jack of all trades and master of none kind of routine to a certain degree. But I do feel like I have some experience to help people out with some of this stuff. Although it's changed a lot. You know, it's really competitive now. I was telling Cassidy earlier, I said, well, what I've seen over the arc of my career is that we got what we asked for, and now we're not so happy about it, because back in the 70s and 80s when I started out, you know, we'd get together like this and we'd all whine with each other about, you know, they don't treat us like professionals and they just treat us like we're all volunteers, and they don't respect, they being, you know, the community and the business and the donors. You know, we're professionals and we're business people and we have budgets to meet and blah, 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 blah. So then all of us like me got degrees in nonprofit management and started getting seminars and getting initials like CPFR or whatever all those things are after their name. And now everybody expects us to be, and they treat us like we're a business, and it's not fun either that way, because you know they don't want to talk to you about the incredible season the symphony or the opera's putting on, or the incredible project you're doing with the underserved children. They want to know what your return on investment is, and what's your profit loss margin, and have you done a cost benefit analysis, and that stuff just gets boring as dirt. You know, we just all get sick of that. So I guess my admonition on that is, if you're going to be a nonprofit, you got to always remind yourself every night before you go to bed of what you're really doing it for, because it's usually supposed to be about doing it for other people out in the community. Because if you lose sight of that, then it is just a job, and you can get a job anywhere, you know, kind of routine. So, okay, so capital campaigns. I made a bunch of notes, and what I'm going to offer to you, excuse me, the way I work with clients, and like when I'm selling myself to somebody, I usually tell them that, you know, if they're interested in me coming in and doing a consulting contract with them, that I give them as kind of part of my business model, like pro bono 4 hours, like a half day. And I'll come in and meet with the staff and some board people and really get a sense of what's going on, and you know, listen to what their problems are and what they're trying to do and whatever. And as I tell the clients sometimes, because what I learn out of that a lot of times is what that nonprofit's telling me their problems are and what they're trying to do is not their real problem. They've really got administrative, structural problems. You know, it's usually about the external reasons they can't start their campaign also, but the issues are really usually internal. And sometimes I have to tell clients, I really can't help you. I'm not the person to do this. So I try to refer them to somebody that maybe specializes in whatever that is they're working on or whatever sometimes. So, but that time with them gives me a chance to get to know them and see what their real issues are, so that I can either come back and say, here's what I think I can help you with, and if you want to do a contract with me to help you with that, I'll do that. But if you are wanting me to do this over here that I don't think is really your problem, and I don't think I can really solve that for you, I don't need to try to do business with you, because that'd just be a waste of my time and your money. But what I want to offer to you all is, when we get done today, oh, and I've got, where are they? Cards. If you want to, call me or email me, and I will be happy to give you an hour to just answer any of the questions you individually have, or discuss whatever you want to discuss related to nonprofit. And I'm not trying to wring business out of you or whatever. I just want to kind of offer you the same kind of thing I do with clients and organizations to y'all on an individual basis, if you want it or are interested or whatever. Okay, I'm going to try to do this stuff, and I think I'm going to sit down. Let's real quick do what I call the junior league thing. Go around and introduce yourself and your name, if you're with an organization, what it is, and your job title with it. How long you've been with that organization, and how much have you been involved in like an annual fund campaign, and have you ever been involved in a capital campaign of any kind? So go.
All right. Hey y'all, my name's Caleb Parker. I'm with the Arkansas Matters Initiative, and it's really just me. We're pretty new, just getting started and everything. Just haven't really done much with it. Just trying to get an idea of where to get started, get going.
I'm Megan Dale. I'm the Chief of Staff for Creative Arkansas Community Hub and Exchange. We go by CASH. We're
awesome.
a new regional art services organization for the Northwest Arkansas region. I haven't been involved with any sort of fundraising, but I'm taking a development communications class as part of a graduate certificate, and I'm writing a capital campaign as part of my final project for that class, so I wanted to get more information and learn. Perfect.
Great. Y'all are in the old Center for Ozarks what was it?
Art Center of the Ozarks.
Art Center of the Ozarks building.
We're
Yeah, thank
taking
you.
over that building and figuring out what it's going to be.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
I'm Eric Sizemore. I work with the Washington Madison County Drug Court and Veterans Treatment Court. My title is Community and Court Liaison. I've been there for about 9 years, maybe this month 9 years. And as far as any fundraising or anything like that, we have an annual golf tournament to raise money for our participants for different things. And I've been doing that for the past 5 years.
Awesome.
I'm Macy Mercer. I'm an intern at this drug court. I also have my friend is part of a nonprofit organization out of Texas, so I just kind of also wanted to probably get some background information on campaign.
And what does that nonprofit do?
It's the Miracle League. It's like a baseball game for special needs kids.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Sarah Lewis, and I'm on the board of two different nonprofits. One is Arkansas United. It's an immigrant resource center, and then also the Watershed Conservation Resource Center. And in particular, both organizations are working to raise money, but in particular, the Watershed Conservation Resource Center is working to raise funds for the River Institute, which we have the land, and now we're working to create a capital campaign for creating the space. So it's really exciting, and so I'm excited to learn. And I've worked for a nonprofit for 13 years. I did previously, and I have a new life to start my own gig. And so I've been part of building a nonprofit. I haven't been part of the team that did the capital campaigning. So I've like watched it, but I've never been in the middle. So I'm excited to do that.
Awesome.
Sorry, I was writing down program ideas. I need a business card.
Okay. Try to show me out, Kelly?
I have to do water stuff for the summer.
Yay.
I'm Kelly Haley, and Cassidy and I work in the Nonprofit Small Business Resource Center. We met with Jim a few months ago-ish, something like that. We do not have to write our own grants now, but we have had to in the past, and we still have to advise some. So Cassidy and I always try to learn from every class that gets presented here.
Awesome. Good.
Okay, I move back a little bit, break the party. Yeah, my name is Rita, and my Chinese name is Xiaojing. I've been to your program, and I met you several years ago. And I'm by myself also, and I have been doing nonprofit all the time. But now I'm thinking, how can I benefit this nonprofit? Then I have a for-profit thing, and still I'm doing a lot of things as nonprofit thing. I need help with how to manage for-profit with nonprofit. I need knowledge and training and all these kind of things, because that can make me more efficient. Otherwise, I work for this organization, that organization as a volunteer, and all my enthusiasms go, and I myself always in an awkward situation. So that's why I decide to change my roles. I have this power, I have this energy and love, but I want to do something for myself. As a woman, I want to save myself. I cannot always work for my family, for my community, for my country, for the world. I have nothing for myself. So I'm sorry. Thank you so much. And
Oh, we can all relate.
thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. Back.
I'm Cassidy. You've already heard from me enough today, I bet. But yeah, I co-manage the nonprofit Small Business Resource Center with Kelly. And we've been a part of the capital campaign for a long time now.
Yeah, our own.
Yeah, the library. And we're not really spearheading any of it, but we are just small parts of it, being kind of advertising what we need, what it's going to do to the community. So.
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
I will.
The library is amazing.
Oh, thank you guys.
Yeah. How much was this campaign? Do y'all know for the edition?
I don't know it. I know it changed because of COVID. We had to break it down into little chunks of action
I
because
think it was like 8 billion, was it?
I don't think so.
8 million?
8 million? I thought you said billion.
Yeah,
Not
it's
billion.
I did say billion, but I meant million. We're not Trump.
Well, it may have felt like it.
Right.
Your new library is clad in gold. It was a little pricey.
No, we ended up kind of breaking it up into different chunks
Yeah.
because of COVID and wanting to get one thing really up and running before we moved on to something else. So
There's still a phase
that's
2.
actually worked really well.
Yeah.
Because phasing in the Innovation Center, that's such a big thing, and so many people want to use every single part of it, so we've kind of had to
Funnel it
roll
towards.
into that slowly.
Yeah.
So many people are using it, like everything's booked over there all the time.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Some of the
That's
quirks
awesome.
of capital campaigns.
Yeah. Well, that's a good lead into it because, yeah, I think the overarching advice is always plan deeply, plan every step of it out you possibly can, but you have to be flexible
Yeah.
because there's so many moving parts, and the most parts are people, and people don't always do what you want them to do in a capital campaign.
More often
Like
than
they
not.
don't give you a big a gift as you thought they were going to do, or whatever. I think the most successful campaigns I've ever seen or kind of been involved with were extremely well planned out. And the advice I always tell people is, whether it's a campaign or a program you're putting together or a performance or this activity here, is start at the end. I always tell people it's the day after, and you got to move everything, load out. It's the day to clean up and then do the what did we screw up, what worked, what didn't work. But start there and work your way backward. So that'll help you not miss a step or some piece of it. Like we got to the event and we just realized that we didn't get light bulbs replaced and half of them are burned out, so, if you start the back end and work your way back, you'll catch most of those things. So I'm just going to kind of ramble through some of this. I guess maybe one other quick thing is just, is there any particular thing any of you have that's a particular question or a particular area that you were interested in? So I'll be sure and touch on it.
How can I make money working for a nonprofit?
Yeah.
This is my really
Okay.
burning
Yep.
questions. Yes.
Well, you can make a living. Some people make a lot of money.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in graduate school and we were having that conversation and the Dallas Museum was opening and someone told us that the director was going to be, this was in the 80s, mid-80s, that the director was going to be paid $150,000. And I was like, you can make that kind of money in nonprofit? I was like dumbfounded. So you can do very well, usually with the larger organizations, but
But if we cannot work for large organizations.
yeah, you can still make a good living, a decent living. Yeah.
What about we use this power and the energy and the knowledge to do a business? Then we can have our own
Yeah.
nonprofit.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I do need help.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. So real quickly, these terms, endowment campaigns and capital campaigns, sort of get interchanged, and especially when you're dealing with volunteers and board members and, people that think they know what they're talking about, and you have to gently educate them along the way. But generally, a capital campaign is about raising the money for a physical asset like a building, like building a new building or expanding on a library like this one or whatever. And an endowment campaign is more to raise funding, interest off of an endowment funding for projects and services and programs out in the community, or maybe to cover the administrative cost of an organization. So one's really about physical stuff and one's about programmatic outreach stuff, just in a nutshell. I'm going to have to skip through all my notes here. So yeah, the words, complex, being strategic, all of those come into play with the capital campaign, because campaigns are, they're longer than an annual fund's a yearly process. It starts over every year. A capital campaign is something that's going to get laid on top of everything you're already doing. And they're generally minimally, or kind of on average, a 3-year project to get it all planned out, put together and implemented and reach success. Sometimes they can run into 5 years. I think some of the professional groups that deal with all this recommend that you try to get it completed in 3 years, and that your pledges, if people have to pay their larger gifts out over time, can run out to 5 years. And the recommendation is that they go no longer than 7 years on that, because it just gets too far from where you started and it can get into too much accounting and tracking and whatever. So those are kind of the time frames for it. But generally, campaign, the calendar that was looked at is, okay, over the next 3 years, or if we start this here, where will we end in 3 years and whatever. Because you have to take all of that planning you're doing for it and keep it in the context of what's still the day-to-day going on. And I think a lot of organizations forget that sometimes, or you have boards that are like, oh, well, no, we don't need any more staffing. Cassidy can just run this, Well, Cassidy's already working a 40-hour week doing her job, especially if she's the development director or the executive director or whatever. So you run into this, we'll call it naivete, we'll be kind about it, but the people that are going to be the core, the people helping you implement this, don't really know what's going on. And so there's a big educational factor in it, and that needs to come on the front end before you launch a campaign, so that everybody's on square one and understanding what's going on. So that dives into a lot of things like, do you have an experienced person on staff that's either had a lot of annual fund experience or that has either participated in or led a capital campaign with somebody else and knows the nuts and bolts and what's going on? Or do you need to hire someone in like me or whoever to come in for a short-term, 1 to 3 year program, depending, to take this on and be that additional support staff or an interim project like that? So all of that's got to be figured out on the front end, and that's a lot of conversation. And so you want to really that's why you want to read a lot of these books and really get a much deeper insight in all of this than what you're going to get today, because this is kind of just an overarching thing. So, why do we do a capital campaign? Well, it's for a clear purpose. I like the word clear. It can't be murky. Donors aren't going to talk to you about a pie in the sky. Oh, it sounds really nice, but you can't explain clearly how it relates to your mission and what you're really doing. And, the silly example of a campaign that, the organization's a library and they want to expand because the community's growing and there's more demand for their space and services and programs, and they decide to do a capital campaign to build an adjacent animal shelter. And nobody can quite get clear of how that relates to libraries and books. So you've got a very mixed message going on the front end. And clarity and clear is really key when you're talking to people about letting go of their money to support what you're doing. So you don't ever want a mixed message. So when do you do it? Well, there's a lot of considerations. The first is the internal environment. Are you ready for it? Do you have a realistic viewpoint of what the extra hours are going to be and the timeline? Is it something we can do this in a year? Some campaigns only last a year, or it is going to take 2 or 3 years. Well, yeah, what's that going to do? How much is that going to impinge on our day to day? And you can't let it impinge, or I guess I'd say, you got to be the duck. You got to be paddling like crazy underwater, but sailing serenely. Because if you give off the sense that you've taken on this capital campaign and you can't keep juggling the balls on what you do day to day, people are going to be reluctant to support that. They're going to feel like, well, they can't manage what they're doing and keep that afloat and take on this extra. So how do I know the extra is going to actually implement the way they're talking to me about it? So you got to be prepared for all of that. You got to analyze your staffing. It usually takes a pretty big volunteer pool of people to be on committees and stuff. So you've got to analyze that it's just the manpower analysis, I guess, is what I'm getting to. Are we going to have enough people to involve in this to really pull it off? And that's anything in life. That's landscaping your yard. It's putting on a play. It's whatever it is. Do we have the manpower and the resource to really make this happen? Or are we going to come up short? We're only going to get half of the lawn seeded. And then we're going to be going, well, what do we do now? So you got to really think through all of that sort of stuff. And again, it's my bias, but I think it really behooves you to at least bring in a third-party consultant, if for nothing more, just to do an initial consult and something like this, to just kind of meet with everybody to say, no, I don't think you're understanding the scope of this, or that's a great ideal board member, but we need to put that in, that can be part of this, but it's going to be in year 2 of a campaign. That usually doesn't happen in year 1 and stuff. So that you've got some objective voice that says, I don't have a dog in this hunt. I'm not going to be here after it's over with. I'm not getting anything out of this but the time I'm getting paid for my advice. And they can really ask some of the deep questions and the hard questions that need to be asked, or to point out and say, I really think your development officer needs some more experience, or y'all need to bring someone in that can work with them to bring them up to speed a little bit more before you attempt this. My example of that would be, I've done in graduate school, my internship was with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, and they were building the Meyerson Concert Symphony Hall. If any of you are familiar with it, go Google it. It is an awesome, incredible building. Oh, you're from Texas. Are you from Dallas? Fort Worth? Oh, my best friends live in Fort Worth. That Symphony Hall is part of the Arts District, and it's magnificent. It is stunning, and it cost a bloody fortune. So I got assigned to work with the individual portion of the major donor campaign. And so that's where I learned a lot about all this nuts and bolts stuff and all the background that has to go on behind it. And you know, it hits some stumbles too. You think there's a lot of money in Dallas, and there is, but even the Meyerson Symphony Hall had to back up a couple of times, and you know what you just said, oh, this didn't quite work. We got to figure that out and adjust it, maybe put it in a phase 2 or whatever. So I learned from that about all these nuts and bolts and the pieces of it. And then right out of school, I got hired by this consultant to work with him I was his leg man, I called it, to do the feasibility study portion of a campaign. And we'll get to that in a minute. But what we learned out of that study was this theater, the donors they thought it was awesome to build a new theater. But they said almost to a person, this organization is not ready to take this on. They need some more staffing. They need to get better known in the community. They need to get some more subscribers and donors. So the answer wasn't, no, we're not going to support you in that. We don't think you need your own theater space. They said, we just think you need to give it about 2 or 3 years and work on these other things and put these pieces in place and your public relations and your image and stuff, and then launch this campaign, and then I'll support it, and then I'll be a major donor, you know, and help you out with that. So sometimes you get that, and I think that's the other piece I try to advise people about is you have to have a tough skin going into a capital campaign, and mainly because that feasibility study, you're going to be having a third party go out and talk to all those people you think you're going to ask for money. And again, that's why you want the third party, because someone like me can go in and say, hey, I've developed these questions with the staff and the board, and these are all the questions we need answers to decide if we're going to implement this campaign, how we're going to design it, what the outcome's going to be, and we need your input on that. And part of that process is then asking them, so here's the campaign pyramid, it's called, and you know, we need a major gift of this much money, and we need this many gifts at this level and this many at this level. After I've gotten all your input on these other questions and stuff, this is something, if we launch this campaign, do you think you would participate in it? And if so, are you willing to give me an idea of what level you would participate in? And then part of that study is to go home and add all those numbers up and go back to the organization and go, this is a deal. Y'all got a $2 million campaign. There's like $3.5 million in here. You need to think a little bit bigger. People are really going to get behind you. Or $2 million campaign. It looks like there's about $1.5 million worth of support. Maybe you need to scale this back. You decide not to do it because you're probably not going to be $2 million successful, is what is being heard. But if you scale it back and listen to your donors, and they'll support at that level, you can be successful at that level. You got to decide if you can live with that or not. Or the answer's no, like the theater. They're not going to support this $1 million theater building, as lovely as it is and for what all it will do, and you may add 3 more shows. They just don't think you're ready for it. So you really, the recommendation is you really do not want to walk out on that limb. You're going to have egg on your face, and you're going to have a much steeper hill to get back with these people. So don't try that. Let's get over here and fix these things they want fixed first. So there's all of that kind of analysis that goes on with all of that. You know, you've got to be sure your board's ready. And boards, God bless boards. How many of us just have had experience with the board of directors. If they're watching, they're going to diss me. But boards are hard because they're well-intentioned people. But you've got, if you've got the best board, you've got a real cross-section of the community that represents all the constituencies that you need, not only that you need to be supporting, but that you need supporting you. And that's the best kind of board. But that means you've got a really broad range of people and personalities going on. And learning how to corral them and get them all going in one direction is just a whole art form in itself. So you've got to have a staff, or certainly an ED or a development officer or somebody at that level that understands that and knows how to work with those people and get them together. And again, if you're going to use a consultant, someone that knows how to talk to those people. Because they're all going to have their pet peeve part of it. One of them's only going to be focused on this general purpose room, and one of them's only going to be focused on the bathrooms, and one of them's, you know, the visionary that sees all of it. You got to corral all of that because you've got to get the messaging in order that everybody's talking the same language all the time, and everybody looks united. So you got to get, you know, you're not going to have 100% on board, but you want to get a consensus that everybody's like, okay, I'm not totally cool with all of this, but I see my part of it's in it, or I see why my piece can't be a part of it until down the road or whatever. I'll give you a quick story on that. I did a strategic planning with a regional arts council in South Arkansas, and they had a wonderful woman who was, you know, the doyen of the community, and she was on every committee and every board, involved in everything, and nobody made a move without. Now, she didn't really give money to anything, but, you know, everybody had to have her input. Well, by golly, she wanted a water park with water spurting up out of the ground like a deal she'd seen in Washington, D.C., and she wanted it in the new plan that was going with the historic museum plan. And everybody else was like, we don't need a water park. It's going to cost a fortune, and wish she would get off of that. Well, part of that process, we got all the ideas down on paper and up on the wall and everything, and got them prioritized into a 3-year implementation plan. And she was able to see that her water park was in there and was doable. It just wasn't at the top of the list for a lot of other people like it was at the top of her list. And it won her over, and she quit pushing people. She got involved in helping instead of trying to manipulate and be the power monger or whatever. So, you know, you have to keep some of that in mind as part of all this planning. And that's what I say. It's like, well, okay. So we know when we hit this piece of it, that one over there is going to balk or try to cause trouble about it. Let's plan for that and how we're going to deal with that and work with that. So there's a lot of demulling of personalities and how to get them engaged and how to work with them, or I guess I shouldn't say it quite that way, but work around them somewhat sometimes to make it happen. But generally, if you've gone about this right and you've gone to the key people and the key people on your board, and they're game to start looking into this to see if it's workable or not, they'll be the brain trust that you need to help with giving a lot of the guidance on this kind of stuff. So it's just, again, it's the pyramid of engagement as such as the money. You got to get the key people engaged with it that'll become the spokesmodels, if you will, to start selling it to the next layer of people. And then doing that study to see where they all stand on all of it. So then you've got the external environment out in the community. You know, in terms of, well, like now, the economy, and, well, we just came off of 2 years of COVID. You know, there's all those factors out there. And you've got to take a really hard look at your organization of where do we really stand in this community? How are we viewed? And that's some of the homework that has to be done. And that's part of that feasibility study, is asking some of those questions. And you'll get those answers. I did a study once, and a guy flat out told me, he said, look, here's the deal. He goes, that ED, he's been there forever, and I'm done with him. And until he's gone, I'm not giving a dime to him for anything. And this is a guy that they were looking at for like a $3 million gift. And he just laid it out. Now, he's not going to tell anybody on the board that, or that ED, or whatever. That's his little secret. But it was the key to that started popping up in other interviews. It wasn't as blatant and direct as this guy was, and they're all confidential interviews, so he let loose. But that started surfacing. Well, that was something that organization had to face, that a change in leadership seemed to be, or a redirection of leadership and their attitude and their positioning in the community had to be addressed before a campaign was going to be successful. So I tell people you have to have a thick skin when you do this study and you're starting to do all this planning stuff, because you're going to hear stuff you don't want to hear. And sometimes it's not pretty and it comes across as really personal, and sometimes it may be, but the people that are telling you this stuff, they really are doing it for the good of the organization. They want the organization to succeed. They wouldn't be participating in the interview or talking to you about a potential gift and stuff if they didn't care. They wouldn't answer your phone call. They wouldn't take the interview. They wouldn't come to the meeting to discuss it, or they wouldn't attend the events and they'd disengage. So they do care, but you have to listen to what their concerns are and then fashion your campaign in a way that addresses those concerns. And it's about, I think, that messaging of we're listening, and we're listening to you because you're important to us, and we want you to be involved in it. We want you to support it. Because you can't just expect them to give you their money. And in this day and age, there's 20 other people in line asking them for their money. You're not the only one. Don't be naive about that. And sometimes they'll tell you that in the interview. Well, Jim, I've got a major commitment to my alma mater, their capital campaign, and to my church, and I got 2 kids in college, and I got to get through that. And they'll tell you really fascinating stuff, but they'll lay it out to you that they won't tell their fellow board member or a staff member or whatever, and they'll lay it out in that confidential interview, and they'll say, I could do this level of gift, but it's going to be 3 years before I can start paying on it. They'll tell you that kind of information. Well, that also helps you then to go back to shape the campaign. Go, well, we know we can lay it in on the calendar when these people will pledge and whatever. And so you can see the cash flow of all of that and see when it's going to come in and see it to the end of, is it really going to work? They've said they've given us enough money, but we're seeing a bunch of its pledges that are going to be paid out over time, and we got to make sure the organization and our cash flow with our regular programming stays in place, and when that's going to hit, because you can come up short sometime and go, oh, we're going to have to go get a bank loan or something to get through here. That jumps me a little bit to how do you pay for these campaigns. The best bet is you figure out the cost of it, what all the website design and the printing and the hiring the consultant if you're going that route, or some additional staff and all those costs. And let's say that's whatever, $100,000, on top of what the campaign. So you add that cost into the goal. You build it into the goal so that as those gifts are coming in, part of those gifts can be used to pay the ongoing expenses that are these short-term additional expenses on top of your regular annual ongoing stuff for this special campaign. Sometimes people go out and get a bank loan and go borrow that $100,000 and pay some interest on it and negotiate a good rate on it. Sometimes you can talk to the right donors about that will be their gift. They'll underwrite the cost of the campaign as part of their gift to it so that you don't have any real cost to it. You've just got a nice check coming in to cover that. I'll give you an example of that real quick. I'll talk out of school a little bit. I worked with the Center for Arts and Education in Van Buren, and they were in a church they'd been in for 30 years that was falling down around them. And they decided that the last remaining ancient building on Main Street could be renovated and make an awesome new art center for them. And so the ED started talking to some key board members about it. And the consensus was, yeah, we can pull this off. We need to do some talking and some planning. So when they got to that point, she told me that one of the key board members that they had tagged with being a major donor, given a pretty substantive gift, he walked in the door one day and said, "Here," and handed her an envelope. And she was like, "What is this?" And he said, "Well, you know, when you took me to lunch and we talked about the new building and what it would cost and what it'd do for the community and everything." And he said, "I've been talking to some other board members and stuff, and there's a sense that we can pull this off, that we can make this happen. I know we've got to do some steps and stuff." He goes, "But this is part of my gift. I went and bought the building for you.
Oh my God.
And here's the deed." He had a lot of money. But yeah, so things like that can happen. You know, so they didn't have to come up with the money necessarily within the campaign. They didn't have to go raise the money from some other donors to buy the building. That became the gift itself. The purchase of the building became part of the campaign. So you can get it in a lot of different ways like that. It's best if you can find some folks that'll fund the cost combined with building it into the campaign is probably better than, you know, paying interest on a loan and that sort of stuff. Yes, ma'am.
Can donors earmark their funds like they do in a different sort of giving campaign? Like, can they say, I will contribute to this capital campaign, but I only want it to go towards the construction?
Yeah, it's called a restricted gift.
Okay.
Yeah, and they do that all the time. They tie your hands with that. And sometimes it's really hard to do, and you have to say no, because the strings attached are so tight that they're going to lock your organization in where they can't really perform long term. Well, you don't want to say no. You want to try everything you can do to talk them out of it and persuade them to be a little bit looser with their restrictions and give you a little bit more freedom to work with that. That comes into, you know, further down, you get into the naming opportunities. And that's where, you know, you'll see it all over here. I told my ophthalmologist that I needed a plaque on the exam room. I had spent so much time in there that I had paid for it, and I wanted my name on the door. But, you know, that's where you can direct some of these people that, you know, they want the water park, by golly. Well, we can get to it, but we can do it later. Or we want a water park. We know you're kind of interested in it. We would love to put your name on that as an incentive to get you to help support that or whatever. But yeah, restricted gifts can be wonderful, because usually a restricted gift will pay for most or not all of whatever the piece is. But if it comes with too many strings, you know, Dallas Symphony example, we had this good old rich oil baron guy who was about 35 years old, and he was worth so much money it just hurt. And the development director came back, she was just laughing for lunch. She's like, "I don't know what we're going to do." We were all like, "Why?" And she said, "He's willing to make a $2 million gift, but he wants all the women's bathrooms named with a plaque that says this lady's bathroom brought to you by Joe Smith III." So, you know, the sexism first involved in that, it's just like, you know, that was in the 80s, and that was just beyond the pale. But she's like, he was just adamant about it. And we were just like, "What did you tell him?" She said, "I have to go talk to some people." So I didn't know what to say to him. Well, they just finally had to take him to lunch and sitting down and say, "There's a lot of reasons why we can't do that. You just have, you know, we really need your gift. Would you be willing to let us put your name on something over here?" And they talked him out of it. But at first, he just thought that'd be so funny and cute, and all the ladies would know he was paying for their bathroom, and just ha ha ha. And they're just like, "No, no, we'll lose so many. We'll have people rioting in the street over this, you know." So you get those kind of strings that you just have to go, "We would love your $2 million, but we can't put that in writing on the door like that. That will not work for us." And either they walk away and you're better for it than losing a whole lot of other support down the line, or you be a good development person, you figure out a way to persuade them and massage them into supporting it another way. So, yeah.
Can naming have be time bound?
I'm sorry, can what?
Naming, like if there's a renovation to the building later, like are there legal aspects to naming?
Oh, yeah, you want everything in writing,
Right.
and it's a contractual agreement, and you want an attorney to have looked it over.
So if there's a renovation, you may need to remove the name or.
We had that happen here, actually.
Yeah.
We had to contact all of the people who donated, and we said, hey, we're going to be moving this. Is it okay? I don't know how much we were bound by it, but a lot of them were.
Yeah, but see, that all goes to that original tenet about fundraising, about donor intent. You always honor donor intent. You don't take Miss Jones's restricted gift that's only for the water park and go spend it on the bathrooms, because if she finds out about that, she's going to be made, everybody in town will know about it, before it's all over. So if you do have to do that, you go to that donor first and get their permission and ask them if they're okay. We've realized that we can get the water park done, or we need to postpone it. This is the situation with the bathrooms, and we really need and you have to make the case for it and get them to agree to it. And that's what y'all did. We know after the fact, we know we asked you to give your money for this, and now we're going to have, because we're expanding, we've got to change that or move it, and will you? And 9 times out of 10, they'll agree to it because they're community-minded and they want to support you. You'll have the odd ones that go, no, I want my name always right there over the door. And sometimes, again, it's the politics of it. You have to decide how to deal with that. Or, there have been cases where you give that gift back. You just say, well, we can't keep your name there. And in the larger scheme, everybody else is going to understand why you had to turn them down and say, we'll just give you your gift back. Well, a lot of times that kicks a psychotic, and they go, oh, well, no, I don't want my money back. I don't want everyone knowing I was that ornery about it. But you have to be willing and able to say, if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do for the sake of the organization's mission. And that's got to always drive all of these conversations. That's the key to all of it. So, yeah, and there was a really famous case, I want to say it was the Barnes Museum. Y'all can go Google this tonight. But it was a private museum this guy had, and it's one of those deals if he died and he had like Picasso's and, no one knew he had all this. Well, he had left all of his estate to build a museum, or I think it was the house was converted to a museum, and all the artwork was to remain in perpetuity in the house and displayed that way. And somewhere 40, 50 years later, I think this is about 20 or 30 years ago it happened, the board and everybody decided to sell off some of those paintings to fund an expansion or whatever. And the trust, the attorneys of the trust, whoever held the trust, sued them, and they won. Because they said, this was not the donor's intent, and we represent that donor even though they're deceased, and we are not agreeing to this change in direction. We won't accept it on his behalf, and they had to not do it. Dallas Museum of Art, when they built, they had the same thing. Do you know the room that's in there that's the woman's bedroom? Okay, it may have gone by now. I don't know how it's been handled. Okay, so they had this really oil area. They were all oil people. Funny. She insisted, she had these Monets and they were all Impressionist paintings. They're gorgeous. They're incredible paintings. But she was adamant that the display area, the exhibition space, had to be an exact model of her bedroom where she kept them. And she won. And they did it. So the grand opening, all the folks you're going through, and you turn the corner and there's like, this, and it's like this over the top, it was one of these canopy beds, and her nightgown's laid out on the edge of the bed and her slipper. I mean, it was just like, whoa, where did we just step off into fantasy land? And it was there forever. I think that was the deal. They talked her into a time limit, like a decade or something, to get out of it at some point. But they needed the gift and they wanted those, it was important they had those paintings. And so they agreed to it. But it was just one of those like, who sold their soul to the devil for this? You know, it was pretty crazy. So sometimes you give. You do take the strings for whatever. One example I have that y'all may know, KUAF, when they built the building, the studio, I think it was the Garners that gave the gift, and it was named I think in honor of her parents or something. So when they'd come in there and they'd go, and we're broadcasting today from the Joe and Sally Smith studio. And now it's the Karen Taha studio. The name's been changed. And I don't know if that's another family member and that's part of the deal, or if it was one of these things that they put a time limit on. We'll give you this naming opportunity, put your name on the studio, the door, the bathroom, whatever it is, for a decade or whatever, because then that gives you the opportunity to resell it, if you will, and do another mini campaign and get another big sponsor to do that. But, and again, as long as the donor understands that and agreed to it and it's in writing, you know, you're good. You just can't do those things without the donor's knowledge, because you can potentially get sued by somebody and get your hands tied where you can. And the last thing you want is a lawsuit when you're raising money. That's, you don't want to go there. So, feasibility study. You want a third party because, like I said, people will really answer the questions honestly because they know it's a confidential interview. Most of the people who are interviewing have done them a dozen times because they're wealthy people and they've been asked by a lot of folks to support big campaigns and stuff. So they know the drill. The trick's getting them to agree to the interview. So you're generally, the numbers are, the organization's going to work with the consultant and generate a pool of about 50 to 60 people, prospective interviewees. They all have to be contacted with a letter explaining to them what the campaign, you know, the who, what, where, when, how. This is what we're trying to do. We're interviewing people to determine the feasibility of launching this campaign. You are valuable to us. We want your input. You know, someone will call you to make an appointment. It'll be a 45-minute interview because you want to keep it short and sweet. They're busy people. And then your goal is to get 25 to 30 of those people to say yes, to give you enough of a statistical number of people to make the study valid so that the analytics, you know, have some weight behind them. They're not just a few people's opinions skewing things. So then the interview phase of that, the questions that are asked are the same questions to everybody, and that's really key. You can't ask you one set of questions and you another, and then try to mind merge those into, well, what does that tell us? You want to ask the exact same question and then look at those answers and see what they tell you. So you go out and do those interviews, and you get told all sorts of stuff. Like I said, you know, Jim, I'm getting divorced in 6 weeks. And no one knows it, but my wife's leaving me, and it's going to cost me a fortune. I can't make any commitments right now. They'll tell you all sorts of stuff. Some of it's interesting, some of it's crazy. But you learn the answer. Either this ain't going to work right now, all those things I said, or it'll work, but those 3 major donors, their gift's not going to come for a 1.5 to 2 years. We got to plan that out and make sure that's going to work before we go and launch it all. So all these moving parts have to, there's just so much pre-planning work. But if it's done and you do, you know, if you check all the boxes and everything, you're way more likely to be successful than not. And when you hear these campaigns that have stalled out, or that suddenly just, you didn't quite hear about them anymore or something, almost invariably it's because there was a lack of planning. And part of that planning, I'll throw out there too, is well, what if our top donor that we need a $3 million gift from says no? Well, the answer to that is, part of your campaign analysis is, for all the major gifts, you need about 3 or 4 prospects. You don't just need one $3 million donor or whatever that top gift, if the top gift's $50,000, you need 3 or 4 names that you think have the capability to give that level of giving. Whether they do or not is a different question. But you got to know if they have the capability of giving that gift, because 2 to 4 of them are going to tell you no, or I'm not sure, or whatever. So you got to have a bigger prospect pool than just the actual amount of people that wind up supporting the project. You know, and then that's, like I say, that's part of it too, the disappointment of you were just sure that Miss Jones was going to give you that $1 million. And she said, no, or I can only give you 300,000. Well, you got to be prepared for that. And that's some of the planning too, of playing some of those scenarios out with some of the key people involved. Well, what if this part of it doesn't work? What would be plan B? So when you get there, you've already got a plan B in place. You're not panicking and trying to go, oh my gosh, well, that didn't work. Well, you'll have a game plan then. And again, having that third party out there to help advise on all that, that's experienced in that with other organization campaigns, it is worth the time and money of that part. I'm not trying to sell me, but I'm trying to sell the concept of that third party, whoever it is can be really invaluable to the success of a campaign.
I have a question about follow-up. So for a grant, when you're writing a grant, the grantee, they want to like a quarterly kind of report on how things are being spent. And for donors, I don't see them needing that, but I feel like they do need some sort of how is it going? You know, and
yes.
how does that? Yeah, is that just general kind of updates, or is it? Do you have to show them how you're spending the money? Because I don't think you really do. Like as a donor, I can donate a little bit, but I don't expect like to see the budget of the nonprofit the way a grantee or grantor would. But what are the aspects of kind of?
Well, a couple of things on that, which brings you to another piece of that, which is the case for support. And that's another thing that's done as part of and prior to the implementation of the feasibility study. So you want to write a case for support, and usually what that case of support physically turns into is the beautiful brochure. The marketing materials. So basically what it is I call it the Bible. And it's the narrative that's written that says, this is who we are, this is our mission, this is what our needs are. Because of that need, we decided to expand the library. This is how we're going to expand it. This is what it's going to do. It's going to have a new children's area. It's going to have an auditorium. You explain all that in the case for support. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what we're looking to do to raise that money. Here's the finances and the budget. All that kind of stuff. Examples of other similar organizations have done it and succeeded, and what it did for them is so you can show that we're not just making this up. Libraries our size in a community this size get to this point. We're not just dreaming here. This is a reality. So you put all those pieces together into that study, and those help answer those questions when you're talking with that big donor. But even when you get down to the $25 donor and you're doing that phase of the campaign, all those small donations at the end, you're still using all that same language so that everybody hears the same story. If you've got a story out there that people are getting mixed messages on, that makes them put their hand over their wallet rather than pulling it out and going here. So you want that case for support. It's used in the feasibility study in relation to all those questions you're asking and to help. And part of that study too is getting them to ask questions so you get them answers. And a lot of times I've had to tell people, that is a great question. I don't have the answer for you. I will get that for you. And you go back and you get that answer from the staff or whoever within 24, 72 hours and get back to that donor with that answer to impress them. Kind of routine. But if you've done your homework, your case support pretty much has already imagined what all the questions are going to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say you can also use social media as a really good thing, just tooting your horn at successes and like inviting your donors as friends and stuff like that, and just it doesn't even have to be that personal either.
Yeah, and that I guess what all that lends to is, in addition to all this planning of raising the money, what's in parallel with it too is the marketing campaign that goes along with it. And that's the marketing, that campaign's got all these different pieces to it. The marketing to the major donors, the marketing to the next tier of large donors, those, whatever it may be, $5,000 to $20,000 donors or whatever, the marketing to all the small gifts at the end that you go out and do the general campaign. So you have to plan all of that out. And that goes back to related to, I think I mentioned it earlier about there's the two broad phases of a campaign are the quiet phase and the public phase. So the quiet phase is all of this feasibility study, case report, interviewing all those major donors, getting all that in line. And then when the public phase comes, the tipping point on that is to come out to the public to announce of, we're going to expand the library in our case to support language. This is what and you're telling the public the same thing you told all the individual major donors and stuff. It's selling the same story kind of routine. And usually, I was going to say, the trigger on that is, the bellwether is, you've gotten half of the goal committed from the large gifts before you launch the public phase. At least half of it. The more you got, it's better, but at least half before you really tell the public. And that's where you then can use all the language about, your $25 will put us over the top. Maybe at that point you've got some challenge gifts that you can tell people, your $1,000, your $100 is going to get matched dollar for dollar. Yes, ma'am.
Is social media enough to keep people informed, or for these major donors that are contributing the first half of it, do you need to give them written annual reports or something like letters to check in with them?
Well, again, I don't, all of that. I mean, you got to lay all that out on a piece of paper and go, which of this do we need to use and who do we need to use it with? Because older donors, who are most likely your big major donors, do they use social media? What good's putting it on TikTok if you're thinking, they're not going to see it there? That you're going to go, well, we're going to have to write them a letter and put it in the mail with a stamp on it the old-fashioned way. That's how they're going to operate. And see, that's what I'm saying. The details that are so important, because you need to know those larger donors that well enough to know, go, guys, we need to just send Jim a letter. And, he's just old-fashioned, and getting a letter in the mail is really important to him. And Cassidy, just sent her an email. She's busy, and she doesn't want all this stuff and all this paper, and she just wants it quick and dirty. So you got to line all that out. And there's so much to use in this day and age. You got to decide what's worth your time and money. But it's all donor driven. It's about them and what works best for them. And that's why it can get labor intensive and time intensive, because you're doing a lot of adult babysitting, I call it. You're doing a lot of hand holding in a way. But that's because it gets back to the crux of what she and I were talking about before y'all got here. That development, for me, development's not fundraising. And it's not, I tell you, I've never asked people for money in my life. I ask them to support a project or a cause or a mission or a part of the community that needs help, and the money comes. Sometimes you get to mentioning the actual dollar amount, they'll usually get some involved, and they'll say, well, I want to get, and see, that's the other thing, feasibility study. You'll find out from people that you've earmarked for $100,000 gift, and they'll tell you, well, I'll do $300,000. You're like, okay. Sometimes you hear, 100, I can't possibly do that, but I'll do 25 or whatever. I always say here's what it is. It's an annual fund or whatever. Here's the answers to your questions. Would you support this project? And what level do you think you support it? Yes, absolutely, I'll support it. Let me go get my check. In the old days, people used to write me a check at their desk and go, yeah, here. That was a long ago. Now it's very complicated. Yes, we'll do it. Well, I got to think about it. I got to go talk to my spouse. He or she's the one that writes the checks, maybe. I've got these commitments that I got to do first. I I'm just going to have to think about it. Why don't we talk in a month, or call me in 3 months after I get back from this or whatever? Or the final answer is no. Not only no, it's hell no. Go away and leave me alone. I don't want to ever see you again. And in every one of those cases, I tell people, at least you've walked out the door and you've learned something more about that donor and how they operate and what works for them and what doesn't. So you've always moved forward. So the thing of development is about people. It's not money. And it's about what you're trying to do, what your mission is. That's what you're really talking about, and it's about relationship building and engagement. Getting those people involved with your mission where you won't have to ask them to support it, they'll want to support it. The other part of that is it may be a little anecdotal, but they used to say, if I can remember it, who your competition is always alma mater. Usually their college, their undergraduate college is their first donation they always give. Their church, their children's alma mater, their pet project, be it the Humane Society or the Children's Hospital or one of the popular diseases, as Bette Midler called it one time. And then the fifth one, and you want that to be you. You want to be one of those top 5. And there's a lot of people competing to be that fifth one. And then where they prioritize you within their 5, is another story. But you want to get in that top 5 kind of routine. But you get there by getting them engaged with you, not just always asking them for money. So that gets back to the whole marketing thing of, what do we? Well, we do need to do an annual report, maybe. We do need to do a quarterly thing. We do need to do a special event because everybody's got a different thing that they plug into. And then you have to look at the time and constraint of money and staffing. Well, we can't do all of those. We got to prioritize it kind of routine. I want to try to stick to this time frame, but I talk too much, so there's that. So I'll give you another example too. You want to tier all that marketing stuff and how you thank those people at the level they're doing it. So a quick reason, it's like the center. What they did was when they got to the building was at the point where people could go in it, because of the safety reasons, they had a special tour just for the board and the key volunteers that, to make them special and different. And then when it got further down the line and it was closer to being complete, so they had a special evening for all the key major donors. They tiered all this stuff to bring them in. And then the next level was when it was pretty much fully completed. They had each board member had the opportunity, not the responsibility, but the opportunity to invite 10 to 20 people in the community that they wanted to be their special guests. And they had a night for 1 or 2 of them to each, and they'd have these little parties of 20 to 40 people that were specially invited to come see it before anybody else saw it. And then all the way down to the grand opening that they just had this week. Well, and then they had 2 weeks ago, they had their major grand opening for everybody that participated in the campaign. And last Saturday, they had the public opening for anybody in the world that wanted to come in and see it. So they had all these markers, and all that is that communicating and building on the message and bringing people in. And so the thing of the major donors are invited to every one of those things, to keep them constantly engaged and finding a doorway to bring them in and get them to participate and so forth. I talked about the, one other thing, I'm jumping around, I apologize a little bit. Naming opportunities, they're usually tied to the gift sizes, and the building itself. This is the Jim Blair building. I think he named it after his 2 aunts or whatever, I can't remember. But anyway, somebody's name's over the door, Jim Blair Library. Those go to the top donors, and then you tier them down. Well, what's the next biggest gifts? The lobby, the rooms, the storage closet, the bathroom, whatever it's going to be, the bookshelves, you know. You have to figure all of that out and what makes sense. Assignments, working all this out. When you get to the asking part, when you finally get there and it's time to go make, just some of the mechanics that you always want 2 people to go. And there's a couple of reasons. One of those people has to be the person that knows that donor well enough that they'll be comfortable, that the donor prospect will be comfortable enough because that person's in the room to talk about a discussion about supporting the campaign. And the other person is with the major donors, is generally the board president, the ED, somebody that's got clout in the organization that donor will respect their opinion. And you script that. And you have to coach those people and turn them into actors of who's going to start that conversation with the donor and what are they going to say, how are they going to hand it off to the other person, how is that going to be shaped to get to the actual ask of the money and which one of them is going to make the ask. You're going to have a packet of information that's all that case for support language has been put together in some pretty fashion. And you will have decided on the front end, if they say, yes, I'll do this, are you going to ask them to sign a pledge card right then and there? And that's one of those nuances of you'll just know if you can do it or not. If you don't get a signed pledge card, you have to go back and immediately before the day's over, you write them a letter that thanks them, reiterates the conversation, your understanding that they committed X dollars, and enclosed is a pledge card and a return envelope. Or if they said, you need to call my stockbroker to give him a heads up, you reiterate what's the steps and what's going to happen with all of that to follow up. And you got to get it in writing to make it legal. There have been cases where people would promise gifts and stuff and renege on them, and you don't ever want to have to enforce it. But you can't enforce it if you don't have something in writing from them and a commitment. Because now, even if you go online and donate $25, you've technically electronically signed that said, I'm pledging that I'm going to pay this out over 12 months, $10 a month or whatever it is. That's that written pledge, that signed pledge, where you have them legally committed to it. The other reason, that's why you want the 2 people in the interview, so there's a witness to the conversation and can be clear. They can't come back and go, well, no, I didn't. That's not what I told you. It's like, well, yeah, Jim and I, Sue and I were both there, kind of routine. You rarely get to those, but you want to. So there's all that psychology involved you have to pay attention to, I guess, is the bottom line of that. So the quiet phase, you got all the major gifts done. You see where you are. You see if you have to readjust the rest of the campaign that you didn't quite get out of the major gifts, and you need to get a little bit more smaller gifts, so you got to broaden that appeal more to get some more gifts in or whatever. You tinker at that point. You've got campaign committees. Like I said, like Dallas Symphony, I was the staffing portion of the individual major donor committee, because they had a corporate major donor committee and a foundation corporate committee kind of routine. And I'm really jumping around, I apologize. In the foundation arena, private family foundations might consider an endowment gift. A public foundation, like the Exxon Corporation Foundation or whatever, invariably they'll say, we do not fund endowments or capital campaigns. They might do capital campaigns. Sometimes they almost never do endowments. They don't want their money tied up like that. So that's part of that research too, of who's going to be in which category and whatever. And then the post-campaign, after you've done all of that and you've gotten there, and how you're announced at the special events, like for which groups of people and whatever. you know, and then deciding things like, yeah, is it going to be an opening exhibition, or are we going to have a concert with it? Are we going to have the library speakers or famous authors come and read, or what all is that going to look like and feel like? And it needs to all tie back in again to that case for support and that overarching language, so it's always the same message and that consistency. You know, everybody's really clear and they feel like they're really bought into a piece of it because they understand it. And they understand it like the next guy, and that's why when they're out there talking about it, they're like, that's what I heard. Not, wait, what? They told you what? Or I thought it was $6 million. It's only $3 million. You don't want to create that. Those are red flags on the play. Yeah. You want clear messaging from the start to the finish. That's why all the pre-planning is to get all of that set up.
Are there special events like opening exhibitions and stuff in the capital campaign budget? Like you budget that from the very, very beginning?
Yeah, so it's like, it's the day after all of it and it's done and the building's open and everybody's gone back to normal, that's where you start and work back. Well, we had a special event 2 weeks ago and we had one the month before that, and you plan all that out, and then you start at the front and work all the way back through it to see if it ties together, if you miss something. And you do all that in the pre-planning stage. And that's where a lot of these questions get answered, like, oh, we're going to need more of that. We need less of that. We're not going to be able to afford that part. You know. So see, then it all looks on the implementation of it, looks out there to everybody that it's organic and that it's human and warmth to it, if you will. And behind it, it's the paddling underwater like crazy. And it's very mercenary and thought out. And it's very, you know, goal-oriented. But that's not what the public and the donors need to see or want to see. So timeline, everything calendared out. I even suggest you plan out all the staffs in that calendar, their vacation time and times off, because you can't burn them out and stuff. So get it on the calendar. Some of this stuff may shift, but you know, send the message of you're part of this too, but we know some of this is on top of your job, not so much to tip you, but you're going to be involved in some, but you can't get burned out. And you have to pay attention to that too, as well, with all the volunteers and stuff, or we overlook, you know, let's calendar this out where we're not just killing them and they give up, but we've spaced it out over enough time. Software, how many of y'all are involved at the level of you've got some kind of donor database software that you use or work with at this point? Sort of. What do y'all use, do you know?
The Foundation Directory Online that we have here. Shameless plug.
No, I'm talking about the gifts that you come in. Someone sends you $25. What software do you record that in?
Oh, I'd have to ask Foundation, sorry.
Okay, okay.
Misunderstood.
Yeah.
Salesforce.
Yeah.
Salesforce.
We don't, I mean, not actively using that, but that's one we had in the past.
Yeah. Not one of my favorites for a lot of reasons. It's real complicated, and at big organizations it's really good for. So what you want to do is find one that's commiserate with your level of the size of your organization. So I'll make my shameless plug. The one I recommend to almost every small and medium-sized organization, which is up to about even $3 to $5 million budgets, it's called Little Green Light, and you can go online and look at it. You can download a 30-day free trial of it, and it comes with fake donor records in it. They're all great. They're like Annie Apple and Betty Banana. They're pretty funny. But I always recommend, if you've got a donor base of givers and stuff, you just take 10 or 20 of them and dump them in there and play with them to learn it. It's real simple. It's an incredibly simple piece of software, but it's sophisticated enough that you can even run a capital campaign in it.
What was the name?
It's called Little Green Light, and it's cheap. It's like $45 a month. Salesforce and some of these bigger ones, they're like a lot of money. They're very expensive. They're for like really big, and I've seen too many organizations buy things like that and they're just overwhelmed with them. They're too big and too many bells and whistles, and you just get lost in it. And Little Green Light, you can Google Little Green Light and then Google things like competitors to Little Green Light, and it'll pull you up 10 or 20 other donor databases. And you can Google little green light pros and cons or customer reviews. And the same with some Salesforce, pros and cons, customer reviews. So you get a sense of them. But you got to have a good donor base going into this, and you need all of your past and current donors in it. The other piece of it that you do in a campaign like this is the prospect research, and there's software, and one of them that I've worked with that I know is called Wealth Engine. And same thing, there's a bunch of competitors but this thing is awesome. These softwares, you go in and put your prospects in, and it goes out there and searches. It's amazing. It looks up their house, analyzes what their house is worth. They go to all the public stock exchange, because anybody's a stockholder in a company has to be listed, not how much stock they have. It searches that and can do an estimate on how much stock they have in a company. This software basically is like major detective work, and comes back and says this prospect is, has an asset base of this range and a gift capability somewhere in this range. And I'll give you an example. When I went to Florida, I was ED of Orlando Ballet. And we were looking at a campaign, doing all this study stuff, and the development director came, we were using Wealth, and she came, she goes, "You're not going to believe this." I'm like, she goes, "Have you ever heard of Joe Smith?" I was like, "No, what's he got to do with it?" And she's like, "Well, he's been a subscriber for like 20 years, and he always buys 2 seats in the very top section." And I said, "Well, why have we never heard of, you'd think she goes, "No one around here knows about him. No one's ever paid any attention to him. He's just a ticket buyer to everybody around here." And she ran him through this deal, and it came back and said he was worth like $10 million and that he was capable of making $1 million a year or something. We were just like, "You've got to be kidding." And so that was one of the people we put into the system of like, well, how are we going to get engaged with this person knowing this capability? And he obviously loves what's on the stage and what's going on. We can't just go ask him for $1 million gift. We've got to have a game plan as part of this campaign of how we're going to get to that point, kind of routine. So you're going to use some software like that if you're doing a big major campaign. Your key volunteer committee, your board committees and stuff, they're going to know a lot of this. And you'll have those private meetings with them, and they'll be able to say, "Yeah, I can tell you that Mr. Smith is he may not buy the building for us, but he's got enough money to give us a gift to buy the building with it. They can do a $3 million. I know them, or I know them from church. I can tell you they can probably do this amount or whatever." You still might want a Wealth Engine or some kind of software to double check that kind of routine. So that's a lot of information. Go grab one of these books. The big thing is you just got to know for your organization. Excuse me?
Are those on the handout you gave?
Yes.
Those on here?
Yes.
Which ones are they?
Conducting a successful capital campaign by somebody, Kent Dove. Capital campaigns, strategies that work. Andrea Kihlstedt, Kihlstedt. Oh, it's on the list. And The Capital Campaign by Julia Walker.
And there should be some new ones coming in too. Our vendor is very slow right now.
And I like this one for you all because it was developed in conjunction with the AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. So it had a lot of input from development officers from all walks of life and levels and organizations and stuff. So and you can tell it's the thinner of all of them. It's more concise because it gets down to some of what I tried to do to get to some of this nitty gritty. It's in a little bit more coherent order than what maybe I jumped around with on you some. So again, thank y'all for coming. I really appreciate it. You got my name and number. Like I said, if you want to call and set up a time with me, I'm happy to talk with you for an hour or so and help answer some more questions or maybe give you some more references of things or people to talk to or whatever it might be that can try to help you out.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so
you all.
much.
Appreciate it.